everyone. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight and being here. The idea behind tonight was really to create the start of the information piece towards the referendum more than people just tuning into board meetings. And so we have a group of people from staff here tonight. We have PTA people here tonight. We have people from our think tank groups here tonight. We have the mayor here tonight. We have school board members here tonight. And so the purpose is for us to get through quite a bit of information, but have this be the starting point. So everybody's on the same page with information as it pertains to a referendum in November. And we'll talk about the specifics. And we'll also talk a little bit tonight about what the different groups can do as we lead up to a referendum so that people have a good understanding of the differences between school people, school board people, and people who aren't attached to the district except for your special kiddos that are in our buildings because you actually have the most flexibility of anyone that's here tonight. So to begin, what I wanted to talk about was what we are considering our current situation and celebrate some of the stuff that we have going on. So we are in the second year of our strategic plan. So we have a direction. I think that's really important for folks here to understand. And if you haven't taken time to look at the strategic planning page, it would be good to take a look at that because the strategic plan really helps our buildings and our principals and our teachers understand exactly what is the direction that we're headed. And our strategic plan really is focused on that bottom right of those three strategic anchors. We're really trying to focus on how do we engage learners more, how do we have effective and efficient operations, and how do we continue to increase our communication and collaboration inside the district as well as outside of the district. For those who aren't aware, Hastings Public Schools is more than just Hastings proper, right? It's 170 square miles. We've got 5 communities that we serve and 7 townships. We've got over 4,000 kids right now, just under 570 staff and 6 sites, but those sites also include the ALC at the high school and then the senior center at Tilden. So that's the makeup of the district. And so this slide might be helpful as we move forward for people if they're asking, who do we actually serve in the district? As far as our students go, we are declining in enrollment. Our kindergarten classes, like most places in our ring around the suburbs right now that don't have a lot of residential growth that has houses that produce yield, which is what we talk about with kids, is each house is able to produce a certain yield over the course of those years in school. And so we see declining enrollment. Our kindergarten classes are well under 300 right now. And what happens is our high school classes, so our 12th grade classes that are over 300 are leaving. So that net becomes that thing that we call declining enrollment. So it's our new normal. And as you can see on the slide, as we project out to next year, it's going to decrease another section worth of kids. So about 30 kids, 20 kids, 30 kids is what the projection is every year until we see all of our classes right around that 275 to 285. That'll be the Hastings new normal for classes, unless something really spectacular happens that brings in people that have kids in droves. The interesting thing, though, here is that our diversity is doubling. It's going to continue. Free and reduced sits just under 30% there, and I don't anticipate that going down at all. Special education is creeping up towards 20%. I think in the next 2 years, it's realistic to think that Hastings will have 20% of its population at 20%. We have kindergarten classes right now where 1 out of 5 kids is receiving some sort of special education services. So that's going to be a need for us. That's important. It's important financially for us to understand that because, as you'll see in future slides, special education is a very expensive thing that happens to a school district, not just Hastings, and it's not totally funded like general ed is. And so it becomes a real impact to how do we service all of our kids in addition to our special education kids. And so that's important. English learners stay just under 2%. I don't anticipate that changing significantly, but it is going to go up. It's probably going to start hovering between 2 and 2.5% of our overall population, and that is going to be linked right to that diversity number that you see there. As that increases, we can expect students that don't have English as their primary language to be more concentrated in the district. The two good pieces for us is that we continue, so if you look between 2013 and this year, we continue to capture a little over 80% of the kids that are available to capture. That hasn't changed. So that is really stable. What has changed a little bit is the number of kids that enroll into the district. So we're hovering right about 100 kids that enroll into the district. So those are two numbers when we look at enrollment and you look at declining enrollment. Those are two numbers that we look at significantly to see, is there something going on? And everything is maintaining its numbers as we flow through time. So that's a good thing for us because you don't want those going into the negative, because that becomes problematic for districts.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What is the number of students that are Hastings residents that enroll out? Do we know that number?
I don't have that one off the top of my head, but I have a person in the back row that I know is probably digging that up right now, so we'll get to that. She'll let me know when she has it. We have the numbers on that. So if you have questions about things like that, we have those. We can pull those up. That's not a problem. One of the things that the school board has really focused on in recent years is the idea of class size. And the reason I have this slide on here is because I wanted to make sure that we were aware and people understand that the school board has really focused on making sure that our elementary class size averages stay within the metro averages. That's been a focus, that's been important. You can see that middle school is right in the metro average. You'll see that the high school hovers over the average. That was intentional by the school board 2 years ago in terms of where do we want to make our right sizing adjustments. And the result was that the high school classes nudged up a little bit and the elementary classes stayed flat. So that's where we're at. One thing that always changes, so if we have people who are kindergarten, have kindergarten kids, they'll say, wait a minute, I think my kindergarten class is a little bit bigger than that. That could be because kindergarten is the one class that we don't have perfect numbers on until the kids actually get here. So we staff for kindergarten and we end up with, kids don't come in sets of 20, right? They come in 1s and 2s and 4s. And so we do end up with a little bit of an anomaly in one building or the other with kindergarten. Another thing that's important, I think, on the other end of the spectrum is really understanding what our kids do. So we have about 30% of our kids that do not go to four-year college after they graduate. That's important. The reason it's important when it comes to having a discussion about referendum is programming. Are we programming in our secondary schools in particular in a way that sets our students up for what's next? So do the courses they take, do the opportunities of the courses that they have at the secondary level match with the fact that about 30% of our kids go to a two-year school or go right into the workforce or go into the military? We have a significant number that is their trajectory, and we need to be cognizant of that as we decide what we're going to do for programming, and programming is dictated by finances, which is controlled by referendum. We have things to celebrate, and I know we have plenty of people that I hear from that are, well, your scores aren't where they should be. Yeah, we agree. We agree. But when we think about the transition of the year and a half of COVID and how that specifically impacted our kids and our staff, when we can say that 76% of our secondary students passed classes and the ones that didn't, we recovered over 640 credits of that, that's pretty significant. That means that when we got back into regular school, we were hitting the ball right away. And we were noticing kids who were falling behind and getting them the credits to graduate. We maintain under 10% chronic absences. That's huge. That's unique. There are a lot of districts that really struggle with keeping kids in school, and our kids like going to school in Hastings. They like being a part of our schools. 70% of our elementary kids have come in at reading at grade level right now. Can we improve on that? Absolutely. But I'll take 70% coming out of elementary kids being at home for as much as they were at home and being behind as far as they were behind. When we look at 5 and 6, these are students that reported that 78% of them, just about 80% of them, have ownership of their learning. From an EduSpeak stance, what we're looking at there is, can a student talk about how they want to learn, how they're engaged in their learning, how it's important to them? And about 80% of our students say that they can do that. And then number 6, almost 90% say that students care about them. That shouldn't be surprising when we look at having only a 9% chronic absence rate. Kids want to be at school. They like being with the adults at school as a generalization, and so we're going to get reports like this, which is great. And then I really look at number 7 as the longitudinal value of kids coming through the whole system. So before COVID, we sat at a 22.9 ACT score average. Coming out of COVID, we're sitting at a 22.4. So our kids that went through that really haven't lost much. We'll see now this year when it comes out how close we are to that, because this will be the second batch of students that have taken that ACT. But that's really a good number coming out of what we came out of. And then finally, our graduation rate, and this links back to 1 and 2. When we have over 3/4 of our kids who are passing classes, and the ones who aren't, we're recovering those credits. We're going to see graduation rates up in the high 90s, and that's what we want. I'm going to talk about bond dollars a couple times tonight, because one thing we need to make sure that we have the facts about for people, because people will ask, we just got done with a gigantic bond, why do you need more money? Bonds are for buildings, levies are for learning. It is true that we had a $50 million bond that we are finishing up projects, and many people that are driving around schools, you see giant holes in front of the schools right now because they're looking at putting in the marquees like we have at the high school in front of those buildings. But those dollars are coming to an end, and what is significant about that is we're in a great spot because our facilities are in good shape right now. So we have been able to maximize that $50 million. We've done a little over $7 million more than what we thought we could do, and that's for a variety of reasons. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have projects that were bid really well and have come underneath what they were projected to cost. As we go through time, one thing is very, very clear, and that is we have to stay connected with the community from the school district, and we need the community to stay connected with us, because it is clearly something that is important to all the residents, is that we have strong schools, and how do we do that? And we have so many community partners that come into our schools, that work with our schools, that work with our students, have students go out into the community, that we really need to take advantage of making sure that our community partners are informed, not just the parents. And so that is something that we need to make sure that we do as we move through the process of referendum work. So the next thing I wanted to talk about tonight are what would we consider needs and wants. So we start getting into the why. Why do we do referendum work? About a year ago, we did our first stakeholder survey. And what came back, which wasn't surprising, is the fact that a lot of our residents believe that we need to focus on mental health, we need to focus on students who are struggling, and we needed to focus on career and college readiness. So we've worked towards that. Those people that have seen a lot of our ESSER dollar presentations, you'll see that that's where we've put almost all of our money into, are those areas. The other thing that the community said a year ago was that technology is important. Up-to-date technology is important. And so we have started that process of think we're back. Sweet. So where I left off, speaking of technology, was the community said that's a really important thing for our kids to have. And then a couple other facts on there that are really important, I think, as we look at this work, is we had over 60% of the community give the district a rating of an A or a B in terms of how do you think the district is doing. That's really important. Nationwide, the average is right around 40%. So that puts us in a pretty decent spot as far as that relationship with the community, at least the perception. And then finally, one thing that almost everybody agrees on is that whole strong schools equals strong community. And I don't think that's anything unique to Hastings, and it's nothing different here. The community believes in the schools, and the schools need the community to do the things that we want for our students. The second survey, right, is going out right now. We're about 2/3 of the way through that survey, and that will be presented to the board on May 10th. Internally, I wasn't going to go through all of the strategic planning, but from a needs perspective, right now we're really focused on elementary literacy. We're focused on how do we get more and more of our kids to graduate and make sure they're on track to graduate once they hit middle school. Trying to attack that achievement gap. One thing we know from the test scores that we've had so far is that no matter what group we compare, our groups of students who are identified through MDE score about 20 points lower than the non-group. So what do I mean by that? Our students of color versus white students, 20-point gap. Our special ed students versus our non-special ed, 20-point gap. EL, non-EL, about a 20-point gap. Free and reduced versus not free and reduced, about a 20-point gap. We're really consistent in the gap that we have. If we were going to fix anything, that's what we should be focused on fixing, because we know, and research tells us that if we can fix that gap for those kids, everybody else just raises at the same time. And so it just moves all the kids up. It should be no surprise that we're focusing on mental health support, student engagement, and then this thing called multi-tiered systems of support. You're going to hear more and more and more about that. You're hearing about it from the legislature. All three branches right now have a thing in there, a piece of their proposal that is geared towards multi-tiered systems of support. It really speaks to the fact that we want to make sure that in every classroom, about 85% of our kids are getting what they need. And then about 15% of those kids that need a little bit more, we've got a system for that, whether it's behaviorally or academically. And then about 5% of the kids need something even more intense, either a really small group or one-on-one. And what do we have in the system set up for those kids so that whether it's academics or behavioral support or even extension, right? So not just remediation, but the kids who are on the verge of being gifted are twice exceptional, the kids who need that extra. What do we have in the system for them to flow in and out of? So that's why you see it here, because our teams are using ESSER dollars to come up with the framework over these next 2 years to get that in place, so we're set to go. Specifically to secondary, we have asked the secondary schools to work on a program review. They're calling them their innovation teams, looking at how do we do stuff differently. And I put this Venn diagram up here intentionally because right now we're looking at what is desirable. Back to the slide, about 30% of our kids don't go to a four-year school. So what is desirable for us to have for our students? The thing that we have to pay attention to is while it might be desirable, we need to make sure it's also feasible and that we can sustain it. Because the thing that happens in school districts over time is this too shall pass syndrome. We get a little bit of money that's one-time money, we put the best program in place, and then the money goes away, and then everybody's left hanging. And then we do that again. And so we really need to make sure that we're intentional about how we design programming so it's something that we can sustain. So that people just understood that our middle school, if they didn't know, serves 5 through 8 right now. We're on quarters, so Every quarter, the kids have a new, either a class, they get grades every quarter. We have 6 periods in the day. A student sees 54 minutes in each of those classes in a 27-minute advisory. And then on the high school, you can see that 9 through 12, they're on semesters. They have a 7-period day and a 15-minute advisory. And while it only takes 44 credits to graduate, there are 56 opportunities of courses at the high school. And so one of the things that the high school is looking at is, because the way our schedule works right now, our 9th and 10th graders don't have a ton of options. They have maybe 1 or 2, but yet we have this discrepancy between 44 and 56. So kids have to wait until they get to that junior year to really open up and take all these classes that they want to take. And so how might we do that differently? So I've added the elementary priorities in here. So when we look at the 3 levels and we talk about what are the priorities at 100,000 feet, elementary really is focused moving forward on how do we provide extra behavioral support. Back to our kindergarten classes coming in at 20% special education. We have students that aren't identified that have needs. Specialist time and give our elementary kids even more of an experience than what they're getting now, in terms of what they see for media, what they see for technology, how they flow through music, how they flow through art, what and how might that look a little bit different. And then creating the spaces for that exposure during the school day. So not relying on after school programs necessarily to give an ad, but how can we do that during the school day and what might that look like? So that's what elementary is focused on. The 2 secondary buildings are really focused on things like wellness, common planning time, student exposure and access to different opportunities. And then at the high school, this real world experience, whether that's it's these big ticket items. And what's going to happen is next Wednesday, the secondary buildings are going to be presenting more specifics on what does this look like, what might it look like, and what are the dollars that are attached to it. So now the fun part, finances. For people that have seen my presentations before, you've seen this slide because it's an important slide. Since about 2003, the state has not kept up with inflation. So by not keeping up with inflation, that leaves us a gap of about $5 million annually, or about $1,200 and some dollars, $1,260 per student. Just if the state would have kept up with inflation every year. Typically they give us 2%, 2%, 2%, something around that. The other thing that's happening is the cost of special education. So right now, we have to take about $3 million out of the general fund to offset the cost of special education because we don't get the reimbursement that way back the federal government said we're gonna fund 40% of special education. And so we pay out of the general fund into special ed cross subsidy, the tune of about $3 million. Our special education costs hover between $4 and $5 million a year. So if you look at it that way, it's over half of the special education costs. And our kids need those services, so it's not something that goes away. They need those services. Another piece that's really important, I think, for people to know is even through COVID, we're not a district that came out of COVID and now is making millions of dollars in reductions in this first year out. The reason we're not is because we kept to the game plan of we're going to continue to right size. We're going to use our ESSER dollars for one-time expenditures each year, and we are going to make any adjustments that we need to make. So we've reduced about $3.5 million over the past 3 years of our operating budget. That's how we're staying solvent right now. Why that's important is, as you will see, even though we're solvent, and people will say, a big piece of this, people will say, well, you have a $14.8 million fund balance right now. You're right, we do have a $14.8 million fund balance right now. The important part to know is that that didn't just come to be. That fund balance has been sitting there, and it's been sitting there on purpose year after year after year because it allows flexibility for when things go wrong. for when things hit the district in a way that we can't otherwise pull out of a savings account. What the blue line shows there is the board-approved fund balance requirement. So the unassigned fund balance, according to board policy, needs to be at about 2 months of operating costs. That's somewhere between $8 and $9 million. So as you can see here, if we would go out and only renew this levy, this referendum levy in November, by 24-25, we will be at or below that fund balance requirement of $8 to $9 million. So really, $8 to $9 million becomes our zero. Because that $8 to $9 million is what allows us, for sure, if something really goes wrong, we can pay the bills for at least 2 months while we figure out what else it is that we're going to do. And so 14.8 really isn't 14.8. It really is about 5.5. Of what can we do, and it's one-time dollars. It's a savings account. Once it's gone, unless you're putting more money back into it. So another piece of information, this funding gap, again, my reminder, levies are for learning, bonds are for building, so we're just talking about levy here. The bond is done for now. So we actually have 2 levies. You'll see a lot of districts only have one big levy that they have, and they renew it every 10 years or they increase it every 10 years. Hastings made a decision several years ago to split that in half. So the first one, which is the one on the left that is worth about $3 million, that's the one that will be in some way, shape, or form coming up in November. So that's what this current renewal would be worth, is about $3 million annually. The second levy will be in 2027. So from a strategy standpoint, our goal when we do the feasible, sustainable, desirable thing, what do we need to do to get us to 2027? Because we got half and a half. So here's what we believe it looks like. So from a financial standpoint, if we don't renew anything, we project that we will be below that fund balance target by 24-25, and we will be negative fund balance, so $0. Below that blue line, and then we'll be in a negative 26-27. So like same thing happens there. So then you ask the question, what can you do in addition to renewing? So if you renew it and you do, one option is to do a capital projects or a technology levy. So the way that works is, we have an example here. If we were to ask voters for a $1 million annual get shifted out of the general fund. So it's kind of the reverse I was talking about with special education. The technology or capital projects levy brings in $1 million that we pay for technology staff out of, we pay for our technology out of, we pay for all the upgrades out of. Anything that is an allowable expense in that restricted budget code then doesn't have to be paid out of the general fund. So by default, you're freeing up dollars in the general fund to be spent on other stuff. That option gets us below the target again in 25, 26, but what we don't know because of how much actually comes out of there is, when does that fund balance drop off? Because now you've got $1 million of swing in there that you've put back into your budget. So then the other option is you renew and then you increase. And so the $150 increase per average house in Hastings, per average house annually. And the reason that we got at 150 is that's what that survey that initial survey came back from a tax tolerance. The majority of people said the max we'd be willing to go out right now is increase is $150 more. We'll see what this next one that's happening right now is and where that's at. If that were to happen, then the fund balance target drops 26-27, so it gets us out yet another year. Why that's important, remember the 2 levies, that next levy's coming up in 27, so now we're getting into the how do we sustain through 27, at least there. So that's the idea behind that one. And then the last on here option is what if you did both, and that gets you out to 26-27 again, and it simply just pushes everything out, because what happens is you stay positive with that fund balance target, you're just eating away a little bit less every year of it because you have more revenue coming in. And these scenarios do not account for anything that's in the legislature right now. So there's a couple huge assumptions that are happening, but what I will tell you, what we're learning from other districts that have done calculations on the legislative items is that most districts are seeing that net, with all the revenues that are going to be added, with all of the items that are not funded that are also going to be added, and I'll talk about those in a minute, the net is a 0 or a negative to most school districts that have done that calculation right now, which is, that's an interesting piece as well. When we look at Dakota County, these are the school districts in Dakota County. This is just to show that of the school districts that have levies, and the blue is a capital projects levy, where do we land in terms of the amount of money that we bring in per student? And so you can see we're third from the left on there. We don't have a capital projects levy. Line represents where we would be without that levy revenue coming in. So here's just a recap of our current situation in terms of where are we, Hastings, right now. Our 22-23 general budget, our unassigned revenues and expenditures were a positive $655,000. So we're in a good spot. The reason for that, we had some one-time dollars that came in that we didn't expect to come in, and that's that inflationary adjustment. We didn't know that inflationary adjustment, if you remember, there was some talk about the residential tax that went up for school districts. Hastings took a really significant increase. So that brought in about $1.4 million that we didn't have in the budget, but it's one time because it all resets. So we really ended up in a great spot because of that as a school district, but it's not ongoing and we can't rely on it. We also had some smaller increases in what's called our compensatory dollars. That also can't be relied on year after year because it's calculated every year and it changes every year. But we were in the positive this year, so that helped us out. We have legislative items that are pending. That's going to impact our budget. We made the decision, the school board made the decision not to make any major adjustments to the budget right now because of what we saw with the levy payable, and that we decided we aren't going to make any additional giant reductions right now. We're going to let this settle. We're going to wait and see what the legislature does. Where's our next play before we go in and remove FTEs and do all that kind of stuff, because that's hard on a system. With 3 groups in labor negotiations again. So that cycle is coming back right now. And those labor negotiations obviously impact what our net is in our current situation. I want to make sure to cover a little bit on the COVID dollars. A reminder, those are one-time dollars. We did exceptionally well with the dollars that we received. The majority of them expire at the end of this year. We do have between $800,000 and $1 million, we believe, going to be left for next year. And we're going to be able to continue a lot of the supports that we put in place. But after next year, what we've asked people to do is really start prioritizing of the things we've put in place: mental health support, chemical health support, student advocates, things like that. What really are the priorities that we want to make sure we try to keep going once those ESSER dollars are gone? And then 23-24, is going to be the last year of those ESSER dollars to fund the MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support planning, EL, all those pieces. So this is what will be happening with the ESSER dollars. A lot on this slide. This was the legislative thing that I'm talking about. So this is changing, but what I want to point out here is that, and the reason we've done this slide this way is all three of the bodies of government have similar packages right now, and they are really pro-education. There's a lot of dollars being allocated to education. You're going to hear continuously folks talk about historic dollars, historic amounts. We don't have any reason to believe right now that somewhere around 4% and 2%, they're not sure on whether it's going to relate to inflation or not yet. But when all three of those groups are pushing forward the same stuff, we're fairly certain that those types of things are going to happen. The issue that we're having right now is understanding what's at the bottom of the slide. These are things that will impact our district significantly when it comes to finances. So if we end up in a situation where they pass the requirement to negotiate class sizes, that's huge. It's huge for a couple of reasons. One, if we have to negotiate class sizes and class sizes go down, that means that we have to increase our FTE to cover those classes, and we don't have control over that. If it also could be to the point, depending upon what it looks like at the grade levels, do you have enough space in your buildings for the classrooms that you may need to have those class sizes at that level? So there could be an unintentional issue that we end up having if something like that goes through. Staffing ratios, e-learning days, student testing calendars. If we have to negotiate those things with our bargaining groups, that could lock us into some stuff that we're going to have to set aside dollars for, that we're not going to be able to put towards other stuff because we're going to have to plan on those year after year after year. Some other things, paid family leave for everyone that's on the table, sick leave for all staff, unemployment for 9-month staff. This is a huge one for us. It's huge for a multitude of reasons. One is we have a lot of people that are less than 12-month employees, and one of the requirements out there right now is that you cannot use your unemployment levy dollars to pay for this, which means we would have to take it out of the general fund to pay for it. So if you start thinking about how the pieces are falling together, that general fund is sacred dollars. You can only take it out once. It can go to pay to different things, but once you take it out, the question becomes, what aren't you doing if you do that? So we're worried about that. Because you aren't able to levy for those dollars then. And then the last one there, the non-exclusionary discipline for K-3. So this bill that's out there means that as an elementary school, when students are misbehaving to the point that they need to be removed from the building, you no longer can do that. You've got to find another way to work with those students, which again gets to be a staffing thing, a safety thing. Where do you put those students? Who gets put with those students? For how long are they there? It's a cost to the school district which doesn't mean we don't think it's a bad idea, that we think that it's a bad idea. What it means is there's no dollars attached to it for us to figure out how to do it. So again, we got to come with that general fund, and it's another cost. So again, we don't disagree that there are historic numbers being thrown at schools right now, but there's some very significant dollar amounts also that are going to be required if those pieces go through. So we have to watch that. So summary, next steps, and homework. Carrie Gore, do you want to help hand out summary sheets while I do this? So I wanted to put together some summary documents just so that people start thinking about this in a simplified format. So we're in a good spot with facilities, first of all. ESSER dollars have helped. They're one-time dollars, but they've allowed us to keep our solvency through all of this. Our operating levy expires next year, and the second one expires in 2027. We've reduced about 3.5 over the last 3 years. Our enrollment is slowly decreasing, so 20 to 30 kids a year, and that means that revenue decreases because the formula is based on the number of kids that you have. State funding to this point is not keeping up with inflation, and so that's another thing. When it comes through and you see percentages of 4% and 2%, remember that inflation is rising at over 7%. So even 4 and 2, we're still at a net negative in terms of numbers. And 1% for us in Hastings is the equivalent of about $300,000. So for every percent, that is an additional $300,000 that comes into the district that year. Our current assumptions have the fund balance below our target in 1 to 2 years if we don't do anything. And the legislative session, as I just talked about, is going to have significant impact on the budget. And there's a couple different options that the board could decide to do. What we believe are key takeaways at this time, because depending upon what happens with the legislature, with our secondary review teams, with further information from elementaries, this could change a little bit. But right now, it's important to maintain class sizes. We know that. Mental health supports, elementary behavior supports, elementary literacy supports, that elementary specialist experience, and those secondary experiences to include career and college readiness. Those are really key priority takeaways for us as a K-12 system. Here's how we get there. Community engagement, have a good project. We think we have a good project, and we think we have a good story. We think that the information that we've shared tonight is the start of a good story and answers the question, why? Why does Hastings need a referendum? Why does Hastings need to consider more than possibly just a renewal? And then where community comes in is being committed advocates to that story. So here's what I was talking about with different roles. So the district. As a district, we can research, we can develop a comprehensive plan, we can communicate facts out, and then what we really can do throughout this whole process is try to cascade communications. And in that cascading of communications through those different means that you see there, is we can only talk about the facts. We can't, district employees, myself, the school board, really can't be on school time be talking about getting people to vote one way or the other. It really is about the facts. Citizens, however, can and typically do have what's called that quote-unquote vote yes group, and there's a lot of freedom with that. And the one piece to why I put this slide up here is that employees and school board members on their own time, so the saying typically goes, on your own time, on your own dime, you can do whatever you want, because they don't give up their freedom of speech and they don't give up their ability to promote something. So if you're here as a community member and you're a part of what's going to become this group, you can talk with staff. It just needs to not happen during the work time, and it needs to not happen while they're in a capacity of serving the district. Otherwise, it's fair game. And so those are really the two pieces that I wanted to make sure we We've been having meetings with the school board, with our communications people, looking at right sizing, getting our budget assumptions done. We've had one round of staff meetings of just basic information meetings, and there's a second round that's going to be coming out. This meeting tonight with key communicators and people that we need to really make sure have the start and understanding of referendum information. Our community opinion survey is going out right now, should be done by next week. We'll be doing another road show to all of our buildings, talking about assumptions, the survey, legislative updates before the school year's out. And then the goal is to have the board be in a position where they can make some sort of a decision between the end of June and the start of July. One of the things that's going to dictate that is there's a tax implication piece of information that we don't think is going to hit until the end of June or that first week of July, and so that could impact when the board wants to make a decision about what they do, because the tax impact is to the residents. So you want to make sure you've got that accurate information before you're going out there. So here's the homework that we have. Take time to review the presentation. On the 26th next week, like I said, the secondary group will be doing their second program review for the school board, and this will include what they believe are impacts financially. ask clarifying questions, understand the facts and the need, and that will be increasing in volume as we get more and more through the legislature. Stay tuned to those district and legislative pieces of information. May 10th is a big one for us because that's when the survey data is going to be presented to the school board at that work session. The other thing that we're hoping to know a little bit more about is where the legislative committees are at by May 10th. We're crossing our fingers that we'll have that information. And then share messaging and help us understand where we can be messaging better with those facts. That idea that strong schools equals strong community. We will be putting things onto our website. We'll have a web page that's devoted just to the referendum. You can use this URL code or QR code rather, to get to that. Carrie Gore just turned the site on today. You'll go there. It'll be blank right now. It's housing the spot, and so this presentation will be one of the first presentations. We're recording this again so that people can go back and review the information. So as we move forward, that website will be the place where we house information to be as transparent as possible with what's going on as it relates specifically to the referendum. And with that, I'm done with my spiel about referendum and the introduction to it. So I don't know if there are questions that I might be able to answer or some of the staff might be able to answer. I know we had a question earlier. And I believe Jen, because my team is awesome, they are pointing at me to pay attention to my phone because they've texted me the answer to the question. In 22-23, we had 432 students that went someplace else.
Does that mean either private school within Hastings or outside of Hastings?
That would be any student that could attend our public school system, but attends another school somewhere else. Including homeschools. And again, those are pretty static numbers. If you look back in time, it's about this, and we would expect that. We've got 3 significant private schools in the community. We know that we have high school students that leave us to go to some of the other schools for sports specifically once they hit 10th grade. And then we know we have kids, while we gain kids back as homeschooling gets into the middle school and the kids come back to the middle school, we then lose kids to things like other online programs. We also, one of the reasons and 17 provides us a great service that we don't necessarily have the staff for. Once students are enrolled there, they're 917 students, not ISD 200 students. And so all those kids count in that number. A lot going on. All right, well, I thank you you can ask about their questions, sure.
I'm always concerned about why the special ed dollars don't match.
To the federal program. However, I think this year is significant in that the legislature has said, we see that need and we see that the federal government isn't doing that, so we think it's important to spend dollars on that. And the expectation was that the federal government would keep up, and they just haven't. Okay. Scott in the back.
Can you remind us what the percentages were for yes and no on the last time we went after the levy was in 2017? And it was just with renewal, and I can't remember if it was 57.33 or 53.47. I know it was 7.
My research staff is looking it up right now.
I guess regardless,
It's in the binder, I just don't know which page.
regardless of what it is, regardless of which number it is, I think the important thing here is to realize that that was just a renewal. And 40+% of the voting people of Hastings didn't want to give us the money that we were already getting.
Yeah.
So this is super important to get a positive message out. Super important to understand if you approve this, here's what we're going to do. And if you don't approve this, here's what it means. Here's what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think those are some very significant points that need to go out there, because we're not a district that's in a position to go out and ask for a levy to go to the moon. We're one of those districts where that size is with a declining enrollment is a double whammy for us. That's where Hastings sits right now. We're one of those districts, and so a renewal gets us to where we are, but those exponential costs keep going. So that's that net deficit. That's why I think that slide, it's important to show people and speak to that slide on that fund balance. That 14.8 million goes away really, really fast when you don't have residual dollars coming into that. And there's the reality is that there's a lot of responsibility put on local taxpayers to keep the schools going. And that is it. And so it's going to take more than just the school district to get this message out there. It's going to take everybody so that people are informed. Really, I mean, to me, that's the important part is we're not asking for the moon. We're asking just to keep things going and maybe get a little bit better in some areas that we know we want to make some changes to meet the needs of the kids. And we've got the data to support who those kids are and what those needs would be. I got my text answer for you. I should turn my ringer on. 57% said yes. Mm-hmm.
That I would recommend is homework for folks, if you don't know this already, is take a look at your tax statement, your homeowner's tax, the property tax statement, and understand what percentage of that or what part of that actually goes to the schools, because I'm consistently amazed at how many people will quote their entire tax bill and say that that's going to the school, or, and it's like, if you actually look at the person that is going to the school, it really hasn't changed a lot.
No.
I mean, and I know if your taxes are anything like mine were this year, mine went up significantly, I'm sure. So we're gonna have that as a headwind as well, because people are looking at that, and I remember going out and knocking on doors, and there's people where if you say, well, it's only, for an average house in Hastings, it's $150, and there's people where that makes a big difference to them. $150 a year is that's a big thing, on a fixed income, whatever the case may be. So, understand those items on your tax bill.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, to at least the knowledge of it. Yeah, Mary.
Can I just piggyback on that? We, as a city, we get a lot of fingers pointed to us. Why did you raise my taxes? Why did you raise my taxes? So what we did just last week, the last 2 weeks, we've gotten a project with tax. We chatted about it as a council when we were getting all these questions. We thought it'd be a great idea to bring in the Dakota County team of assessors so they can that is we need to educate people. Half the people don't even understand the property tax statement, how can we educate them better?
Or maybe we need to put something together that we can put on that web page.
And to that, we have an aging community. with many senior citizens who are in fixed incomes. I've heard it before, I've heard it 30 years ago. Well, my kids already went to school, I don't want to pay for anything else. It wasn't. How can we change that mentality to, these kids are our future? There are business owners, there are ex-officials, there are school teachers. How can we change that mentality for that senior group of people to say, these are positive things? I mean, you've got a good presentation, but to hit that dynamic of it, you know, that senior age, that we all feel bad. We're all gonna be there at fixed incomes. But how important is it for you to live in this community where these kids are gonna be our cops, they're gonna be our firefighters. We want to help them succeed.
And our caretakers.
And
Yes.
their caretakers. So I think, I mean, I've lived here my whole life, I've heard it forever. Well, I already put my kids through school, you know, that type of thing, so, can we make it positive, a community positive approach like we're talking about?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
coming from the real estate world, you do not have strong schools, your value of your properties decrease dramatically. So if you want to reach out to the bills about how it will affect them, schools don't get the money that they need to be successful, the property values will decrease. All the services that they rely on would be defunded because their property taxes are increased to pay for the police, for the medical, streets, etc. And again, if you want your school district or your community to do well, look at the school districts that are thriving. They have growing populations, they support their schools. That's how you, I think you have to get into that. So, if you want their property to maintain that. So,
Good point. All right. Well, so moving forward, the plan is for us as a district is, like I said, we've got the 26th coming up. We've got May 10th coming up. Once we have those two pieces, we're going to probably do another one of these sessions. And hopefully now that the people are here and saw what this is like, you know, maybe we'll get more people at the next session, because I do believe that one of the key things is like what was just raised here is how do we get the same facts out to everybody and why things that are important. And then people can start crafting messages, and the people that are going to be on some of those committees will have the right information and the factual information that they need. And the other piece that it allows for is the more people that see this, hopefully the more people that will be providing input to our school board about what they believe is important and the direction that they believe the school board should go in terms of making decisions about this very important topic. So thank you again for attending. Appreciate it and appreciate your time.